You've decided to make singing your vocation. Now what? You may be struggling to balance your life and a career in music. Are you curious about how other singers make it or how they've dealt with success and failure? Do you wonder what their biggest challenges have been, or how about what they've learned on their journey and what's important to them today? Hi, I'm Valerie Day, a singer, educator, and creative explorer. You might know me from my work with the Grammy-nominated band New Shoes. Welcome to Living a Vocal Life, where I interview singers who have succeeded in creating a life in music. You'll hear from vocalists of all genres in different stages of their careers, including singers who've been on the Billboard charts and those who are teaching the next generation. What do they have in common? They're all performers with amazing stories to tell and experiences to share. In our conversations, you'll learn what inspired them to become a singer, the kinds of challenges they've encountered, and how they've overcome them. I'll also share what I've learned on my own journey as a singer and educator, practical tools and insights that will help you to live your best, most authentic vocal life. Welcome to another episode of Living a Vocal Life. My guest today is Bill Wadhams, one of the lead singers from the 80s synth-pop band Animotion, whose song Obsession landed in the top 10 in countries around the world in 1984. I've known Bill for years, but recently we've had a chance to get to know each other better on a tour he's dubbed the Genius Insanity Tour, otherwise known as Lost 80s. In 2018 alone, our bands played 22 cities together in 3 months. As he puts it, the genius part is getting all the bands together. The insanity part is what happens when all the bands get together. Bill is a multi-talented artist. Since his MTV days, his life has been a series of creative projects, from his work as a songwriter to stints as a graphic designer with companies like Nike and Citigroup. His latest foray is into the world of musical theater, where he's found a home both as a singer and creator. Whether he's performing, composing, or telling a great story, Bill is a natural. Thanks for joining me on the podcast today, my friend.
Thank you so much, Valerie. Wow, you make me feel really good.
You've done a lot of different things, but I'm going to take you in the Wayback Machine to the origin story of you as a vocalist. What's your first memory of singing?
Well, I sang with my family. I come from a musical family that started out as the family that sings around the table, sings on the way to Grandma's house in the Country Squire station wagon. Mm-hmm. And my mother used to sing lullabies to me. She was also in a women's singing group called Sugar and Spices. And they did record one album, but it was not released to the public. It was one of those things where you go into a studio and record, and then they cut a vinyl and you walk away with it. This was probably in 1962, something like that. My mother was singing lead on Lemon Tree, very pretty, and the lemon flower is sweet. You know, it's like, oh my God.
Nice.
Yes.
Nice. Well, we kind of have that in common, actually, because my mom and dad sang, and we sang in the car all the time, you know, harmony parts and stuff.
Yeah.
What was the part that you sang? Did you sing lead or did you sing harmony?
Oh, I sang harmony. I actually liked harmony. And my mom would usually take the melody, and my dad was also kind of taking the melody, maybe an octave down and a little off pitch. But yeah, what he lacked in pitch, he made up for in enthusiasm.
That's great. You got to have the enthusiasm in there too.
Yeah.
Well, did you feel like you were a natural singer, or did you have to develop your voice?
That's a good question. When I was in something like second grade, my second grade teacher, Mrs. Sauer, was teaching us to sing This Land Is Your Land. And when it came around to this part, from the redwood forest to the Gulf Stream water, whoa, you know, I just yelled that, whoa, and pretty high up too. And she said, Billy, was that you? And I said, yes, Mrs. Sauer. And she goes, whenever we get to that point in the song, you sing that again, okay? And she really encouraged me throughout my entire elementary school career. Up until when I was in 7th grade, she was having me direct the class singing, Consider Yourself. You know, I was up in front of them conducting. So she really made a huge difference in how I thought about myself as a singer.
Teachers can make all the difference, right?
Absolutely.
Wow. That's incredible and great to have that kind of encouragement as a young person.
Yeah.
Everybody remembers their first gig.
Yeah.
I read that yours was in Rochester, New York at Eddie's Chop House. What do you remember about that gig?
I remember that I was in 8th grade and some kids in my class were forming a band. They knew that I played guitar. One of the founders of the band, he owned the PA address, so he was the lead singer. And he had an uncle or a father that owned a restaurant called Eddie's Chop House, which was a manly place for manly men with a manly, So our first gig was at Eddie's Chop House in kind of a downstairs room, kind of off the main floor. And I remember that we played Gloria, Gloria, Gloria. And then we tried to play Last Train to Clarksville, but it was too complicated, too many chords. So we had a meeting in the bathroom. What are we going to do? Let's play Gloria again. Okay, we came out and played Gloria, and that's all I remember about that gig.
That's a great memory, though. I mean, when in doubt, just repeat.
Do what you know.
Yeah, do what you know. I love that. So did you know from an early age that you wanted to be an artist of some kind, a musician, a singer?
Yeah, my brother Tad and I both loved playing guitar, and we would play, we would jam, learn songs together, and sing in choir. I was in my first band, the band, and it was BANNED, a really great name for a first band, I must say. The Band. I have a picture of us with that on the drum, the kick drum. So from that point, I was in bands all the way up to Animotion. I was always in a band. So I wasn't sure that would earn a living for me. As a matter of fact, when I was in Potomac, Maryland, while I was going to school, I was driving a school bus for emotionally disabled children, emotionally and intellectually disabled children, so that I was earning a living, but I had plenty of time to rehearse and play with my band. And so I was always in a band, and I really wanted to make it in music, but I had no idea how to get there other than just keep playing and hope to be noticed.
So was this job that you had as a bus driver when you were in college?
Yeah, actually, I wanted to go to the Berklee School of Music, and I was actually taking guitar lessons from an instructor from the Berklee School of Music who was back home during the summer months. And he was helping me prepare myself to go to the Berklee School of Music. But my parents, they thought it was a new and not very credible school, so they didn't want me to go to it. They would tell you if they were sitting here that it's their one only regret with me in raising me was that they did not support me going to the Berklee School of Music. But as I look back, you know how things go. If I had gone to the Berklee School of Music, I would not have had a hit with Animotion. I'm sure of that. I would have gone somewhere else and ended up somewhere else. So instead of going to the Berklee School of Music, I went to community college for a couple semesters. Then I dropped out and drove the school bus for a year. I went back to school for another couple of semesters before I went to Los Angeles. So
it's interesting how life's twists and turns can take you in a totally different direction. And what looks like, the biggest bummer when it happens, which I bet that felt huge to you, not being able to go to Berklee, turned out to be the best thing ever. So how did you end up in LA, and what's the origin story of Animotion? How did you come to be in that band?
Okay. I moved to LA in 1979. I had a 1-year-old child and wife. And when I got there, I started painting houses. Painting houses was my day job. I ended up having my own company, and everyone in the crew was a musician.
What was the name of the company?
I think I called it Chaps Painting Company. I wanted it to sound like an old English. Chaps. Bill Wadhams, painter, Chaps. I don't know what that means. Like we're good old chaps. We had these funny little white caps that to me looked kind of, I don't know, English or something, old school. So we're like, hello, you would like some chaps to paint your house.
That's hilarious. But you're all musicians in this.
We're all musicians. Dwayne Shockwell went on to play with Glenn Frey And one of our other painters, Rick Nair, went on to produce a lot of people and did some recording with Prince. Another guy who was my main man painter was David Arkenstone, and he is a huge new age, not new wave, new age star named Arkenstone, Yeah.
Wow. So all of these guys got their start in your painting company.
Well, all of us were struggling and trying to make our way in the music business and find our place in it while we were painting houses.
So instead of being an actor working in a restaurant, you were a musician working in a painting company that you owned. I mean, this is interesting to me because it seems like from the very beginning, you've been very entrepreneurial.
I guess so. Yeah, I am.
Yeah.
And how I got to Animotion, I was in a coffee shop wanting another job, a different job. And I saw an ad that said wanted someone to work in a recording studio. Honestly, it was as simple as that. And there was an address. I don't think there was a phone number. There might have been a phone number, but anyway, you were supposed to go down there to the studio. It was on the corner of Sunset and La Cienega in an old building where the Doors used to rehearse. It was actually a Doors rehearsal place. And it had a picture of an upside-down tuba player on the wall of the building that looked like something from Peter Max or Yellow Submarine, real wacky painting for the upside-down studio. And I walked in, and to make a long story short, I met someone there who introduced me to someone else, who introduced me to someone else, who introduced me to Astrid. So it really, if I hadn't have walked in that door, I wouldn't have met an engineer who introduced me to another engineer who had a studio. And in this studio, they were teaching engineering, and they used me as a guinea pig band. So in other words, they would record me while they were teaching their students.
Oh, that works out well. So you didn't have to go the Chris Christopherson route where, he went to Nashville and then ended up in the studio there sweeping floors. You were actually at least being recorded.
Yeah, I was. And then one of the students was managing Astrid and a band she was in.
Ah.
And then that band, which was called Red Zone, that band broke up. And they were looking for someone to play guitar and sing with Astrid and write the songs because at the time, Astrid wasn't writing any songs. No one in the band was writing any songs. And so they needed a songwriter, singer, guitarist. And at first glance, I thought, this is not really my group, my tribe. I'd actually seen that band play. And I thought, they're cool. And I liked Astrid, and I thought she was very dramatic and theatrical on stage. And so I thought, okay, these guys, they have a manager, they had a music lawyer, they were willing to invest money in recording my songs with this new band. I'd been pursuing my own career sort of as a solo artist. I changed my name from Bill Wadhams to Billy Bond, and I had the Billy Bond Band, but I wasn't getting any attention from record companies. As soon as I started working with this group, with Astrid, we were signed to a record deal in less than a year.
Which is kind of miraculous.
Which is kind of unusual.
Yeah.
But even though you mentioned 1984, we did record our album in 1984, and it was actually released, but it kind of languished. You put out a record, it kind of didn't do anything for 9 months or so until one of the biggest stations in Los Angeles picked it up after throwing us into a battle of the unknown bands. So they played Obsession against some other unknown bands, and we won that little battle of the bands 5 nights in a row, so they added it to their playlist.
Wow.
Yeah.
I did a bunch of research trying to figure out your origin story, and it's complex, first of all, because of the way the song was written, and then you guys picked it up and recorded it. But I never came across that Battle of the Bands story, another kind of moment that, again, if that hadn't happened,
right,
everything else that followed wouldn't have happened. And that song must have had a special something because it won, but it just, there's some music that just kind of pulls people in right away. And it's not like you guys paid to play, That's right. And you didn't pay to get it on the radio station. You were just in this Battle of the Bands, and it actually connected with an audience.
That's right. I think every artist needs an advocate. Every artist needs someone that is going to promote them or push them, and whether it be your brother, your best friend, your husband, your wife, or a manager, somebody. And I think one of the people who really made a huge difference her name is Jean Johnson. And Jean Johnson was a promo person at Polygram Records. And so she's probably the person who got us into this Battle of the Bands thing. And then once it started to go into the top 10 on that station, she made sure that stations around the country took note of this song that had risen up in one of the biggest markets in the country. So that's how it went from LA to Miami to Seattle to New York City to London.
Wow.
Just it went on from there. But a lot of times it takes someone saying, hey, did you hear this? Have you seen this?
Yeah. Who knows how to work it and has the relationships
Absolutely.
themselves to get people to listen to it.
Yeah.
So it's kind of miraculous, though, that you had a record deal within a year after you and Astrid joined forces.
I'll add one little bit to that is that we were lucky that an A&R man named Russ Reagan came down to see us in our rehearsal studio, and that's how he decided to sign us. He'd worked with Neil Diamond, the Beach Boys, signed Elton John, signed Kiss. I mean, he's a legend in the business and an easygoing guy. And he comes down to our rehearsal studio. We played 4 songs, and he said, all right, guys, gather around, have a seat. He said, look, here's what I'm thinking. She sings, he sings. Could be like a Fleetwood Mac for the 80s.
Wow.
What do you think? And it was based on
Wow.
I think I can sell this as a Fleetwood Mac for the 80s. And that was that. Yeah.
That's some good company. So you go to this studio, you get introduced to Astrid, you do this Battle of the Bands thing. The right people are there to help you get a record deal. What happens between the time that the record comes out and it's just kind of languishing? You went back to painting, didn't you?
Once the record was very successful, I was on Entertainment Tonight being interviewed, and I told a story about how I was painting a house after the record had come out, and our video was not on MTV, but it was being played by a local video program called Video One, and this was in Los Angeles. And Richard Blade, who we work with even today, and he was with KROQ, he was a creator of this video program. And so I'm painting a house, and I heard Obsession coming from the TV in the living room of the house I was painting. And I'd never seen it on TV. And I knocked on the door. I said, excuse me, do you mind if I come into your living room? I think I'm on TV. And she says to me, if you're on TV, what are you doing painting my house? And I told that story on Entertainment Tonight. And the funny thing is that after that, people would stop me in the grocery store and say, hey, you're that house painter who sings. You're that. They knew they didn't even know the name of the song or the band. They just knew you're that house painter that sang that song that became a hit, and you were still painting.
The story became famous.
That's right.
I love it. So then, how long was the band together? How long was Animotion together, and what ultimately happened with you guys?
Well, first album went well, and we toured. We had a great time. We opened up for Depeche Mode on multiple shows. We toured with Howard Jones. We had a really good time. Going into the second album, when the second album was done, the president of Polygram Records was under investigation for payola.
Oh, boy. What year was this?
1986.
Yep.
And front page Wall Street Journal, Polygram Records under investigation for payola in the music business. And our first single called I Engineer was climbing the charts just the same way that Obsession was. Like entered at like 90, went to 80, went to 70, and then disappeared. And we asked the record company what happened. They said, we are boycotting independent promotion, and we really don't have the internal resources to get your record every place it needs to be. So it's falling off.
Oh, wow.
And that was kind of that. We put out one other single and a video. MTV was giving us world premiere status. They were really pushing us, but the record company just didn't have the resources to get us into radio. And they were, at the time, having to make a choice of who are we going to prioritize with the resources we have. And yeah.
Mm-hmm. That was an interesting time period, actually.
Yeah.
First of all, maybe we should back up a little bit and just talk about what payola is. So can you talk a little bit about what independent promotion is about and how it works in the record business?
Record companies, artists, singers, managers, we're all trying to be heard on the radio. And part of it has to do with who do you know at the radio station and do they believe what you're saying? So if my manager calls up a radio station and says, hey, I want to talk to the program director about my new artist, Valerie Day, and they go, look, man, the guy that knew you here is gone. You're going to have to send in a submission just like everybody else, and you go back into the pool of, the endless pool of things that people aren't going to really pay attention to. In other words, it's who you know, and independent promoters had relationships. So an independent promotion company, a network, it might be a half a dozen guys that travel around the country and they have buddies at the radio station, or they've developed a relationship with people at the radio station, and they just advocate their artists, and they come into the radio station, they say, hey, man, do me a favor and play this new record. I'll make it worth your while. And so there's different ways to make it worth your while. There's books about this stuff.
Yes, there is. There's a great book that we read after our band days called Hitmen. Hitmen describes it really well, and I wish we'd read that before we got a record deal. That would have been very helpful.
Yes, seriously. As a matter of fact, the guy who was the president of our label is featured in that. The whole story about what happened with him is in Hitman. I've got a copy myself. So it's people investing a certain amount of money in people that could get stuff done, or even right into the radio station. There's some kind of help, support, money, something coming into the radio station in exchange for breaking an artist, playing an artist.
We had a little run-in with that very thing in 1986 when this payola investigation was going on through the FBI. Our song happened to squeak in without any kind of independent promotion because there was a gap, because there weren't a whole bunch of records right then being pushed by money. And so a few of us with songs that people liked got heard and then kept getting heard because we weren't crowded out by all the rest of the money that was happening. However, when we released our second single, we were told, now you got to play the game, and we're back. These independent promotion people are back.
Right.
So, and by the way, they end up on that list of money that you have to repay the record company for, like all the hamburgers you eat during the recording session and the independent promotion, the videos that you make are all recoupable by the record company. So yeah, it's interesting. But what's interesting to me about this too is that without the money part even, it is all about relationships. When people ask me, what's the most important thing that you learned through this process? That's the thing I would say, and so it's not just relationships with business people, but it's also relationships with your bandmates, like when you finally find people that you can make music with, that you really are about the same kinds of things in terms of what you value and why you're doing it and all of those things. It's a miracle. It's like finding somebody to get married to, except there's like 4 or 5 of them. And so speaking of which, people always thought that you and Astrid had a thing going on, but you didn't. In fact, as far as relationships go, you've had a really interesting relationship with her over the years. Tell me about it.
Well, when I first met Astrid, as I said, she was theatrical, attractive, and young. She was about 24 years old. She came from a suburb of London. She hitchhiked from New York City to Los Angeles, where she met some musicians and got into her first band, Red Zone. She'd never been in a band before. So she's a very adventurous young woman.
No kidding.
And so we started to sing together. I think that pretty soon I found that we had different tastes in music. We had different tastes in music and fashion. So we were kind of at odds. And we were at odds throughout our career in the 80s. And it took me a couple decades to look back and realize that it was our differences in some respects that made us interesting. And now when we're performing, we allow each other just to, whatever she wants to wear, whatever she wants to say, sing, whatever is fine with me, because she also grants me the gift of just whatever I want to bring to the stage, as long as I'm not doing something that in some way is abrasive or aggressive, we will play a cat and mouse game on stage. We will just allow each other to be who we are. But back in the day, it wasn't that comfortable. And part of the reason is because when you're having this rush of success, everybody is starting to think, oh my gosh, how are we going to keep this going?
Yeah.
And then you look over and you think, my bandmate is screwing this thing up.
Right.
She's going to take us down the wrong alley or something. She wants to be more like The Cure and the Smiths. I want to be more like the Police. And so there was this going on. And at a certain point, when we had an unsuccessful second album, we were looking at the third. It was make or break it. And we got new hard-ass managers. And the managers said, you guys need to replace Astrid, and we have someone in mind. That's why the band broke up, because new managers came in and said, this is what we think you need to do. And so the guitarist, the keyboard player, and myself, we walked into Astrid and her boyfriend, the bass player, and said, we are breaking up the band and we're taking the name. And it was, it was a coup. We took over the band. We bumped them out. When we got back to the manager's office, we found out that they actually had another singer in mind already, and it was Cynthia Rhodes. And Cynthia just happened to be the girlfriend of someone they were managing named Richard Marx.
Uh-huh.
And because of tensions within the band at the time, I was open to replacing Astrid. I didn't know that they were going to push Cynthia on us.
Mm-hmm.
So it was really disorienting, and it was kind of, looking back, one thing I would just throw in as a statement of how to be in a band is like, stick with your mates, stick with the people within the band, because everybody on the outside is going to try to tear you apart or remake you. And if you've got something that's working, try to keep working with what's working. In our case, we tried to rebuild the thing, and the guitarist, Don, and keyboard player Greg, and I, we thought we had an idea about what we wanted to do. The management company had a different idea. I went along with it for a while. I liked Cynthia. I recorded with Cynthia. She's a lovely person. But when we got down to choosing songs, we had a new A&R guy, and he wasn't accepting the songs I was writing. He wanted to remake Animotion. He said he wanted us to be more like Heart and Starship.
Oh.
And if you knew anything about Heart and Starship in the 80s, they were giving up their original sound in favor of having their songs written by Hollywood songwriters.
Mm-hmm.
And matter of fact, Starship came out with the song, We Built This City on Rock and Roll.
Yeah.
Rolling Stone readers called it the worst song of the 80s.
Wow.
I just saw that the other day. But the thing is that We Built This City was, lyrics were by Bernie Taupman, who wrote the lyrics for our second album, first single, I Engineer. Again, the record company saying, well, we think this song is better than anything you have in your playlist written by Bill or whoever. So we're going to lead with this single.
This is a story that I keep hearing over and over again.
Right.
And there are so many factors, from the musicianship in the band to the songs, of course, to your management and your manager's ability to have, a good relationship with the record company. And it is easy to look around at your bandmates and go, oh, you must be the problem, and then, bands break up because of musical differences, personalities that rub each other the wrong way, or money. And so if you were talking to someone who is putting together a band for the very first time, what would you tell them about how to pick musicians, how to structure the band, how to keep band politics from interfering with the creative process?
You just really have to trust your own instinct that you're in the right place with the right people. I've been working here in Portland for a couple of years with someone named Paul Trubachik, and Paul and I are so musically compatible, and he is also very supportive of what I write. I try to be supportive of what he writes. If I make a mistake and I drop a verse or something when we're performing, he will immediately correct his direction. He'll be right there with me. You just need to find allies. You need to find people that you think are compatible musically. If you can possibly find people that you think are even better than you musically, that's great. It's like, this old saying of like, if you want to learn how to play tennis, find someone who plays better than you and just up your game.
That's great advice.
I would just say, find people who are very good and who have something unique that you don't have, and then try to find people that you can trust. And then once things start moving, you have to trust your gut and trust your bandmates and try to define what you're doing and where you're going as best you can at all times, and then go forward being as true to yourselves as you can.
San Francisco. We were somewhere in time between the summer of love and the dawn of disco. Out of time, out of money, out of luck, but we don't care. At Ashbury and Hinch met your soulmate. It was nothing but pain from there. Raise your expectations. Make a date with destiny. Have no fear, like a pioneer. Yeah, raise your expectations. Make a date with destiny. Have no fear, like a pioneer.
Hi, I'm Valerie Day, and you're listening to Living a Vocal Life. Before we get back to my interview with Bill Wadhams, I wanted to tell you about a project that I've been working on that you might be interested in. It's an online course called Becoming a Singer. My own journey as a singer and educator began more than 30 years ago with the Grammy-nominated band New Shoes. It's taken me from smoky clubs to packed arenas, from performing in obscurity to making hit records. I've spent years in the trenches as a performer and teacher, working with students of all levels of experience, each with their own dreams and goals. This has given me a front row seat to the kinds of struggles that singers like you wrestle with every day at every stage of your career. Becoming a Singer is the course I would have loved to have had when I started my path. It's also the course I wish I'd had to give my students during the 20 years I taught in my private studio. Whether you're just getting started or could use some guidance on your journey, Becoming a Singer will prepare you to step out on stage with confidence and purpose. If you're being called to make a life in music, head to my website, valeriedaysings.com, to find out more. And now back to the interview with the incomparable Bill Wadhams. If you could go back in time and give your younger self some advice on how to work best with Astrid, what would you say to him?
Oh, I think that what I would say is find out what Astrid really wants to do here. Find out what her dream is.
Ask more questions.
Yeah, well, really find out what she loves and what she wants to do and help her do that, and ask her to help me get to where I want to go. I wish that I had spent more time listening when she started playing me like the Smiths. I remember I hadn't listened to the Smiths a lot. And she played me a song. She says, this is the kind of lyric that, this is the kind of song that Charles and I, her boyfriend, like. And I remember the lyric was, and if a double-decker bus runs right over us, and I was like, what the hell? But I didn't listen to enough of the Smiths. There was a lot of great stuff with the Smiths and also with The Cure. And I think that if instead of going, yeah, but that's not my bag, that's not. And you know what, Astrid, I'm the writer of the band. I'm the writer of the band. And so, go with me on this. Right around the time I first met Animotion, I was thinking about leaving the band. It wasn't really my jam. And every time I came to a rehearsal to say, I'm going to quit, something would happen. Like they'd bought a used amp for me, a used guitar amp. I was, in between amps. And here they gave me a wonderful amp. And so I thought, okay, I'm not quitting today, And then another day would come and I stuck with it. But at a certain point, I think you have to take a look and go, okay, there's a good reason to stick with this. I don't know what it is, but my gut is telling me. And well, in the case of Animotion, there were things happening. We were getting calls, from a producer or from a record company or something. And that had not been happening with my own band, partially because I had no contacts, zero. I was just playing at the Troubadour and playing at Madame Wong's. But so now I was in the world of managers and lawyers and things like that. And things started to click. And I think that the best advice I could give to my young person who was launching this thing with Animotion, I'd say, just close ranks with a band. You've got a good band, just tighten up and work with everybody to do the best job you can.
That's some hard-won advice. And the great thing about it is that you guys have a great relationship now. Talk about the band getting back together. How did that happen?
Well, we had a bloody breakup, the coup, and then 14 or 15 years went by, and I contacted Astrid and Charles to say, hey, would you like to just get together and have a beer, glass of wine, and talk? I really had no agenda in mind, but they said yes, and we went and we sat down. And what really helped was that they had formed a couple bands after Animotion. And I was the leader of the band, musically speaking, in Animotion. They had agreed that I would be the musical director because at first I was the only writer in the band. And early on, we would have some conflicts about how this song should be realized. And I said, look, guys, I'm only going to be in this band if I'm bringing in my own songs, you have to go along with me the way I want them played. I'm not going to tell you how to play every note, but I'm the musical director. So along the way, I wanted to fire the drummer because I wanted a different drummer. I wanted a better drummer in my mind. That's what we needed to make the songs what they needed to be. So we cut to 15 years later, I'm sitting with Astrid and Charles and they're saying, we finally understand what you were going through. They created their own band. And the people would come in, and then they found that they were getting the same kind of friction from their bandmates that they were giving me in Animotion. So they forgave me. They nice. Understood why I might have been treating them poorly, and enough water had been under the bridge where they're like, wow, we had a good time together. We had some great times together. And we kind of understand why you were, crazy about certain things or why this or that happened. And then we just agreed that if an opportunity came up that we would consider playing together again. And then out of the blue,
an opportunity came up and then you started playing together and you still are. You're still doing these shows, which is, it's been really fun to watch you go out on stage and do your thing. And you guys throw down. I mean, you really do. It's fun to watch. I think it's so interesting, these shows that we do together, these Lost 80s shows, because when you're on the stage with all these different, bands coming up and doing their thing from years ago, I have this feeling like we all just know how lucky we are now. When you're younger, when I was younger, I felt like, we were lucky, but I still had so much to prove. And I don't carry that kind of, I have to prove myself chip anymore, which is such a wonderful thing. I can just relax a little bit more and have fun and appreciate the moment and the audience and, the other people on stage. And just, it feels like a high school reunion where everybody's dropped the stuff, all the stuff that they carried around and just are glad to be live.
I think so, but I would say when you're telling me this, it sounds like you're so relaxed about everything, but I know how much you prepare. You and John both prepare for these shows. You're very professional, even though it may seem, and it does seem from the audience, that you're very relaxed and at home up on stage. But I think that all of your years of experience go into the current performance, the current stage, what we're putting out on stage. We spend a lot of time thinking about how we can do this, especially getting up, doing a few songs, getting, all that stuff.
Well, and as you said, Astrid had only been in one band before Animotion, right?
Right.
And so, all these years go by and she's had, and you have also had a whole bunch of different experiences with different people. And you build that professionalism layer by layer by layer through experience. But, all the other stuff is worth it, I think.
Yeah.
It makes the performance richer and better and more fun. For sure. Yeah. So you got back together. You've been playing again for what now? 14, 15? How many years? Well,
actually, no. We got together in 2001. So we
goodness.
Are 19 years.
19 years?
Yes.
Wow.
Yeah.
And then you decided to make another record and you released Raise. Why did you decide to do a new album and how did it come about?
Ever since we got back together, we always talked about how could we do another record. And we had a few times when we would go into a studio, here's some song ideas. We would go into a professional studio, we'd flesh them out, and then we'd think about how to finish them. And we didn't have enough for an album. And sometimes people in the band would say, well, okay, we recorded those songs, but I don't love them. Sometimes, we would get down the road and then something would pull the plug on it. Either one of us or two of us or just energy or somebody would go somewhere. It's
tough to get everybody together.
Right. A lot of false starts. And then a little label in London called Invisible Hands asked us to make a new record. They're like, you guys make a new record, we will put it out. And they gave us a budget. And, I called up my original guitarist, Don, who has been playing with Rod Stewart for the last 15 or 20 years now. He's been with Rod Stewart this whole time, traveling around the world every year. If you look at Rod Stewart's schedule, it's absurd how this guy can keep going. He just had a #1 record in the UK. It's phenomenal. And it's a very professional band. I told him, I said, we have a record deal. And he said, we should have Rod Stewart's musical director, Chuck Kentis, produce the album. So Chuck had a studio in Los Angeles, and they said, okay, well, where are the songs coming from? And I sent them some demos that I'd had or things that Animotion had recorded. What we ended up doing was Rod Stewart was in residence at Caesar's Palace, so I flew to Las Vegas, and I spent some days with the producer, Chuck, who's also a keyboard player, and with Don on guitar, and we wrote together and we recorded in the hotel room at Caesars, and we came up with in 4 days, we came away with most of an album.
Wow. That's kind of different than the old days. Huh?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. It was great. And then we went back to Chuck's studio in Los Angeles. Astrid came down and she had written some songs. She submitted some things. We encouraged her to complete those songs. She had some songs on the record, and our original keyboard player, Greg, came in and played. Once we had a budget and a record company saying, let's get this going, we pulled it together and put it out in January 2017.
So what would you say was your biggest takeaway from making a record now compared to years ago?
I was very fortunate to have a producer who was really skillful with me in the singing, in the recording booth especially, and having everybody in the band being very supportive of the words that I wanted to bring to it, the voice that I wanted to bring to it. I just felt very supported as an artist.
What a lovely feeling. I feel like good producers are like good doctors that have great bedside manner,
Right.
They know how to bring out the best in you, and not everyone does.
I was going to just give an example of we were working on the record, and usually almost all of the background music was done by the time I'm singing the vocal. And so I'm hearing the record, it's exciting, and the producer would say, okay, just go at it any way you want. So I'd come in and I'd do what I think is I'm going at this song, bam. And then he says, all right, I want you to take a deep breath, the next time you sing it, I want you to have more air. I want you to breathe. I want you to get your air in your lungs before you sing each line or whatever. Not every single line, but he just essentially just said to me, put more air in your voice. And something real subtle like that made the difference. And then I would sing, and then he'd say, okay, you're singing, it sounds like you're a little bit angry as you're singing this. Just soften for me on this next take. Things like that.
Oh, so helpful, because you can sing a line so many different ways. I mean, it sounds like he's kind of directing you like a theater director would. The emotional content, he knew how to pull that out of you. How cool is that? Well, it's a lovely record, by the way.
Thank you. Thank you.
It's a really lovely record. I was just listening to it yesterday, and I especially like everything. And I can hear that breath that you're talking about in that song. It came out really well.
When I go away, you're here when I return at the end of the day. My thoughts become blind. Could it be an answer you're trying to find? Let me breathe, give me open sky. Would that make a difference? Without wings, how can we fly? Mistakes of perception, we bleed imperfection. Everything, that's all you want to know. Everything, sometimes we can't let go.
Most people don't know that you're a working graphic designer and that you've done it for years, doing design for companies like Nike and Citigroup. How has that fit into your life? And do you consider yourself, an artist as well as a musician?
I see myself more as kind of a journeyman graphic designer. In other words, there are so many great cutting edge graphic designers in Portland, Oregon, and I've had a chance to work with some amazing groups of people. But to me, it's some skill sets that I learned way back when some of these graphic programs first started showing up in the 80s with freehand, and this is even before Adobe stuff came out. So along the way, I've just been really lucky to get jobs that were kind of fun and creative, and doing mostly magazine ads, working on graphics for some television commercials, things like that, and eventually websites.
And does your graphics work support your musician life? A lot of people listening are thinking that they haven't made it in music unless they're working full-time in music.
You and I both did music full-time for a bit, for a while, for a few years or something. For me, when I left Animotion in the 80s, I got a job at NBC TV in Burbank, and I was having such a good time, I hardly could be bothered to try to get back into the music business. For me, at the time, the music business was like a bunch of pirates, just treating each other badly. And next thing you know, I'm working at NBC and cruising around, smoking a joint with the vice president of NBC at lunchtime, and then just going back and working on ads for the Golden Girls while I'm buzzing, It's like, it was so much fun.
That sounds way more fun than the music business.
And so along the way, graphic design has paid my bills for years and years, but I think that having your basic needs taken care of, whatever your job is, as long as in my case, it's never stressed me out or wrung me out so much that I couldn't go play music in the evening, or take a 3-day weekend and go travel with the band or something, take a vacation and go travel with the band or go somewhere, play with some musicians. I've always been able to keep up my being a musician while I'm working my day job,
Nice. And it's a day job, it sounds like, that you enjoy. That's great. Yeah. So are there things that you've learned from being in graphics design that have helped your music career and vice versa?
I think the main thing is just that I've been able to create little posters. I've been able to do my own graphics and build my own website and things like that. So that helps. But now that I'm thinking of it, when I worked at Wieden and Kennedy here on Nike and Microsoft and Coca-Cola, I'm working with incredibly creative people. One of the things that I learned from the advertising business that I wasn't really into before was revising. A lot of us as songwriters, we write something, we're like, that's so precious. I can't believe I came up with that wonderful thing. Well, when you're in a creative team at an ad agency, you'll come in and say, I've created this wonderful thing. And they're like, yeah, that's pretty good, Bill, but let's make it better. You know what? It's all wonderful except for this whole side here is ugly. This whole thing here doesn't make any sense. Yeah. So you've got a good idea. When I was working at Wieden and Kennedy, I met one creative director in particular named Jelly Helm. And Jelly would take a look at what I had done and say, this is great, Bill, but I want you to spend the afternoon revising this part. Think more about this one part of it. Is there something else you can do to make this better? To make this communicate more clearly or to look better? Yeah, so I've learned to revise. And then in the last year, I've taken 2 classes at Portland State University on writing. And both of them, again, are really helping me write. And I think revision is something that I didn't really do a whole lot of as a young person. And I'm getting more into it now.
And it sounds like you've learned how to relax into it instead of, like you said before, being precious about the thing you created. So dare not touch it, I
think I've also gotten more in tune with when something is really shining, the kernel. You don't mess with the core of the thing. It's everything else that kind of is around it and how you're framing it. And, sometimes we used to have like, oh, that's a great chorus. And then the verses were just, you just like threw a bunch of stuff out there and it just didn't make any sense
In 2012, I saw you in Artist Repertory Theater's production of the Pulitzer Prize-winning play Next to Normal, that powerful musical about a family struggling with the effects of mental illness. And you played the father opposite another guest of this podcast, Susanna Mars. And I was really impressed with your performance. How did you get involved with the production, and what did you learn from doing it that was different than being in a band?
I got into it just because I had run into a musical director named Rick Lewis here in Portland, just met through friends of friends. He was aware of me as a professional singer from the pop world. And Next to Normal is a rock musical, 5-piece band, even though it's got a cello. It's a mostly kind of rock music, and they were looking for the right voice. And so he called me and asked me if I would be interested. And I had studied acting in Los Angeles, but I hadn't really put it to use much. So he said, would you be interested in this? And I said, yes. I had to do a video audition for the sort of acting part of it. So I did a monologue and they hired me. And then boom, I was 5 weeks of rehearsals and 42 shows, and I loved it. I loved it.
You're a natural.
Well, but the hardest part about it was for me was that I had to actually sing beyond my own range. I'm glad we got to this because I did want to talk about a couple of teachers. I know you're a teacher, and a teacher can make all the difference in the world. I was lucky to study with someone named Roger Love in Los Angeles, and he was a protege of another acting teacher who I think's name is Seth Riggs. And Seth Riggs was Stevie Wonder's singing coach and George Benson and all these amazing
I've heard of Seth.
Singers who could go way up into their head voice. So when I first started learning the songs for Next to Normal, I was doing exercises that I'd been taught by Roger Love to try to extend my range. And then I discovered through the Berklee School of Music a teacher named Ann Peckham. And I got from her a CD with vocal exercises. She had, what's it called? The Singer's Handbook, Ann Peckham, Peckham. And man, I love her exercises. So I would spend almost an hour before every show back in kind of like the workshop area, and I mean where they build sets of the theater. Nobody else in the cast was having to do this as far as I know. Maybe they did a little bit of warm up, but I had to spend an hour just coaxing my voice to get up there, because at one point I had to sing an A, and that, I mean, I'm comfortable singing E and F sharp maybe. Once I get to G, I'm not so sure I'm going to hit it tonight. And then A was out of the question. But there was a point in the play where I had to look at this young woman and just out of thin air, pop, right up there, just hit that note. I even said to the musical director, how am I supposed to do this? I don't think I can do it. And he just kept saying, you'll get there, you'll get there,
Wow.
you'll get there. I don't know. I just loved the experience. And then afterwards, the musical director said, you should write something, because there aren't that many parts for, at the time I was 50 something. Now I'm 60 something. And so I've been not desperately, scratch that word. I've been conscientiously working at writing something that I could sing, and it's funny that now I've got a musical done. My writing partner didn't want me to sing any of the parts because she wanted me to be objective as we're working on this in progress. And the part that I wanted to sing, now we've got a guy, I love him singing this part so much that I kind of don't care. I'm playing in the band. I'm playing in the backup band for the musical, and I'm really enjoying. Yeah.
So tell us a little bit more about this musical. I mean, I know you've been writing and producing songs for it for the last 2-3 years now. Is that right? Yeah. And the thing that's remarkable about it is that it's based on a true story about a rock festival that took place in Oregon in 1970. And I just love the story. So tell us a little bit about what it's about and what's going to happen next with it.
Sure thing. I can tell you that I've built a website that is Vortex One Musical, like it sounds, Vortex, Vortex, the number one, and the word musical.com. And there's some background information, a little video with one of the songs in it. In 1970, it was Vietnam War era. And in Portland, Oregon, the American Legion was coming to town with Richard Nixon as their keynote speaker. And the FBI approached the governor and said, we are expecting 50 to 100,000 protesters to confront the American Legion in 1970 at their convention. And what are we going to do? What are we going to do here to avoid violence? Kent State had just happened. There were protests all over the country. And at one point, Tom McCall's assistant, a guy named Ed Westerdahl, said, these hippie protesters want to create a concert like Woodstock. They want to have a concert. They're asking us to give them a park. Somebody came up with the idea to give them a park 45 minutes outside of town. It's a beautiful park, river. We'll give them the park, let them have a concert out there. It'll draw them away from the downtown core, and that will be our solution. Well, a lot of the protesters didn't like that. So there's conflict within the Free People and the People's Army Jamboree, these different groups of young people that were protesting. And then you have the business people and the American Legion. So there's all kinds of wrangling that was going on, and it was all meant to avoid violence happening on the streets of Portland. And eventually they sanctioned a rock concert in Estacada outside of Portland. And they told the police, don't bust anybody. If they're smoking pot, if they're drinking, if they're naked, do not throw them in jail. Just as long as they stay out there at the park and nobody's getting hurt, let them do their thing.
Remarkable for that time period. I think it's still to date the only state-sponsored festival of its kind in the country.
Right.
I mean, and what a brilliant idea. It worked.
Right.
It worked.
It worked. And people were saying to the governor, Tom McCall, this is political suicide because you're sanctioning a pot party. And he was a Republican.
Yeah.
He was a moderate Republican, but he wanted to avoid violence. And this turned out to be the best possible solution. And it did, in fact, work for everybody. But, we have him singing a song about political suicide is one of the songs he sings. a bullet to the temple of a promising career, because he thought, I'm going to do this for the good of Portland, even though I might lose my career over it. And he was actually reelected. So it turned out good for him. Yeah.
It worked out.
And so what we do is we're looking for a company to produce it here in Portland. And how we do that is we put it up on stage with all our actors, 12 actors and a 5-piece band, and we perform it. And we get as many people that can say yes to some kind of production to come down and see it and get some support. We've performed it once on stage, and now we're about to do it a second time. This time will be the full thing. First time was a partial performance.
And when's that happening?
February 3rd here in Portland. February 3rd, it's a Monday night at a place called the Village Ballroom in North Portland.
So 2 more questions, 2 more quick ones. How has the word success changed for you since you first started your career? What does success mean now, and what did it mean for you then?
I think my idea of what I thought success would be in the music business would be that I would have a performing and recording career that would support me financially and support a family. I'd seen a lot of other artists that, even though they weren't very successful for a long time, they hit it big enough to essentially set them up for life financially and support their life. In my case, I had fame without fortune. And for me, success is being able to support myself in life however I can. And in this case, it's from multiple streams of income, from graphic design, from sometimes performing, sometimes royalties, multiple income streams. So it's just, for me, success means finding a balance in my life between work and play, home, family, friends, and everything in moderation.
I love it. That's great. So perfect. Besides Vortex, what's next for you?
Well, when I was in Next to Normal in 2012, a prominent director of musicals whose name is Bill Fennelly. He actually was the first director for Jersey Boys in New York. He launched Jersey Boys, and he's done a whole bunch of projects all over the country. He saw me in Next to Normal, and he expressed interest in working with me. Well, the first idea I had for a musical was kind of autobiographical, about a guy who's kind of lost in space. He's kind of lost his religion here and there. He's been through 2 divorces. As I'm on my 3rd marriage, I said, the winding road of my life, that was my first idea for a musical. So over the last couple years, simultaneously with working on the Vortex, I've been working on what could be a one-man show, or it could be a one-man with a backup band. It's similar to Springsteen on Broadway in that it's stories and songs, and it chronicles the turning points in my life, the ups, the downs, and the songs that I wrote along the way. That's why I was taking these classes at Portland State. We're developing it. The first draft is essentially done. I've created a SoundCloud playlist that has all the stories and all the songs. And now we're kind of at the stage where we're shuffling those things around and trying to figure out what's really the best version of this before we try to get it put into a theater.
How lovely. You have a lot going on, Mr. Wadhams.
I do.
I love how there's actually this connective thread, this thing that kind of, ties it all together. And you just don't stop and continue to create no matter what.
I got advice from a karate teacher once, which is kind of off the wall. But right before I moved to LA, I said, I'm sorry, I'm going to have to quit the class because I'm moving to LA. I'm trying to make it in music. And everybody says, oh, yeah, you'll go to LA and they'll chew you up and spit you out. And you'll be coming back home with your tail between your legs like everybody else. But he said to me, you know what? Everybody gets a break. You just have to be sensitive to when your break comes. Don't stand there with your mouth hanging open, grab it and make the best of it. And I think really, even though I looked at what was going to become Animotion, I was like, I don't really, this isn't what I thought I would be doing. But there was a door opening, and it was really opening, and there was momentum behind it. And I think that everything that I do, there's someone sort of cheering me like, hey, Bill, how would you like to do this? What do you think about this? And then as I start going down the path of doing like my personal show, this guy in Philadelphia, the director, is helping me out. And then I take a class and the students say, yeah, we want to know more about your brother Tad. It's just, I have momentum, but the momentum comes from people supporting me and from me listening to people around me and helping guide me to go down the right track.
That's really cool. I love it when you have an idea and you put it out there and it sings back to you like that through other people,
right.
Yes. And that does help you keep going. Well, I can't wait to see what you do next, Bill Wadhams.
Thank you, Val.
It's been really a wonderful thing to talk with you today.
Thank you, Valerie. I appreciate your interest, and I look forward to getting back on stage with you and John on one of our wacky tours.
Yes, me too. That's it for this episode of Living a Vocal Life. You'll find complete show notes for each episode and more offerings for singers at ValerieDaySings.com. You'll also find more information there about my online course, Becoming a Singer. I'd also love to hear from you, so please let me know what you found useful in this episode and what you'd like to hear more of in episodes to come. You can get in touch right there on my website or on my Facebook or Instagram pages at Valerie Day Sings or on Twitter at Valerie Day. If you like what you've heard, consider sharing with a friend. You can also subscribe on iTunes or wherever you go for podcasts. Better yet, leave a review. The more reviews, the easier it will be for other singers to find it. Until next time, be well, keep singing, and thanks for listening.